All right, forget the textbooks and the dusty archives for a minute. Today, we're heading deep into the Australian bush, gathering around the campfire for a story. And this isn't just any story. It's a chilling, first-hand account of an encounter with something that just shouldn't exist. Let's get into it.
And this quote right here, it really gets to the absolute core of the Yowie mystery. See, it's not just about some creature hiding out in the woods. It's about something that seems to play by a whole different set of rules. Something that can be right in front of you 1 second, and then just gone. And that's exactly what a young scout named Peter was about to find out the hard way.
So our story kicks off at a scout camp, smack in the middle of Australia's famous Blue Mountains. The scene is set, the night is young, and honestly, everything seemed absolutely perfect for a little adventure.
I want you to just picture this. You're out at a place called Jelly Bean Pool. The sky is crystal clear, just packed with stars. You can hear the soothing sound of the river running over the rocks, and the whole forest is alive with the buzz of nocturnal life. It's that perfect camp night you wait all year for. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt out of place at all.
So, as the sun goes down and the fire gets going, what do a bunch of scouts do? Well, exactly what you'd expect. They decide to play a game, a seeking game. You know, hide and seek. And as fate would have it, our guy Peter was picked to be the first one to seek.
Okay, so Peter finishes his count, turns around, and heads off alone into the darkness. He's following the path of the river, scrambling over rocks, and moving further and further away from the light and the safety of the campfire.
And that is when he sees it. As he rounds a bend in the river, he spots a dark shape on the other side of the bank. It's just squatting there, low to the ground by the water's edge, a perfect silhouette. And his first thought? Ha! Got one! He figured he'd already found one of his friends. But then, the silhouette moves. It scoops up some water in its hand and brings it up to drink. And as it slurps the water, it stares right back at him. That's the moment the blood runs cold, right? That sudden realization that you are being watched, and not by another scout. Peter just freezes. You know that feeling when your brain just can't compute what your eyes are seeing? He's blinking, tilting his head, trying to make the shape make sense. Is it one of the other guys trying to pull a prank? Or is it something else entirely? His mind is just scrambling to put this thing in a logical box. And in that instant of confusion, any shred of doubt he had just evaporated, because the figure, slowly and very deliberately, began to stand up. 7 feet tall, a massive, towering figure that just seemed to suck the air out of the night. The game was over. This was no scout. His brain is just firing off these impossible details. It's this huge, beastly thing, covered from head to toe in black fur. And its eyes, they didn't reflect the moonlight, they seemed to absorb it. He couldn't make out a neck, couldn't see any ears. It was just this solid, powerful mass of a creature. As if the sight of this thing wasn't terrifying enough, another one of his senses was suddenly, violently assaulted. A wave of the most indescribable smell washed over him from across the river. I mean, listen to that description. A death-like, pungent smell. This is a detail that comes up again and again in these encounters. A smell so shocking and so awful it can literally freeze you in your tracks. It's your body's most primal alarm system just screaming at you. Peter's reaction is pure instinct. He throws his hand up to cover his nose, trying to block out that overwhelming stench. And in that split second, the whole encounter hits its unbelievable climax. In the blink of an eye, the creature moves. It doesn't run, it doesn't lumber. The account says it jets off, scrambling up the riverbed with a speed that seems absolutely impossible for something that big. And let's just break down how insane this movement was. It leaps onto the sheer wall of the mountain, runs straight up into the bushes, and then, in a matter of seconds, it's just gone, vanished over the top. It was a completely physics-defying escape, as if the rules of gravity just didn't apply to it. So, how can something so massive disappear so completely? Well, the local folklore actually has a pretty wild explanation. The Yowie is said to exist in what they call a 5th dimension, a place between our world and another. The idea is that they can just step through a kind of window and simply disappear, which honestly fits what Peter saw perfectly. Peter scrambled back to his friends, totally frantic, trying to get the words out to explain what he'd just seen. The whole group grabbed their flashlights and went back to the spot. They searched everywhere, the riverbank, the bushes on the other side, but there was nothing. No broken branches, no tracks, no sign of the huge creature at all. It was as if it had never been there. Almost,
They found one thing, one piece of physical proof left behind in the soft mud by the river, a single, large footprint, proof that something had been standing right there, just moments before.
So what in the world did Peter see that night? The lore offers up a few really fascinating ideas. Could it be a lost species, some kind of primate that survived in isolation? Maybe a branch of humanity that de-evolved, took a different path? Or, given its unimpossible escape, was it something else entirely? A traveler from another dimension?
In the end, all Peter had was a terrifying memory and that one single footprint. He had the proof that something was there, but the explanation, well, that remains just out of reach. And it really makes you wonder, right? If you were the one standing by that river, staring into those light-absorbing eyes, what would you believe?
Imagine for a second that you're a kid playing hide-and-seek in the woods.
Oh, terrifying right off the bat.
Right. It's pitch black, you're creeping around these damp trees, and you peek behind a large rock. And, you're fully expecting to find your best friend huddled there, probably trying not to laugh.
Yeah, standard childhood memory stuff.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
instead of your friend, you lock eyes with, like, a 7-foot-tall, dimension-hopping primate.
Wow. I mean, in a fraction of a second, the absolute foundation of what you understand about reality it just totally collapses.
Completely.
The physical world you thought you knew is suddenly operating by an entirely different set of rules.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are opening a genuinely massive, just fascinating psychological and paranormal dossier compiled by a Dr. Tennillious.
Right, the Tennillious files, quite a read.
It really is. The mission here today is to examine a documented childhood encounter with the unknown. And we want to follow Dr. Tennillious' investigation into how the human mind distinguishes between an internal psychological trait like a hyperactive imagination and a genuine external supernatural threat.
Yeah, and to do this, Dr. Tennillious' file actually combines two very different types of material into one comprehensive study.
Which is such a wild approach.
It is. First, we have these clinical notes on a patient named Peter, whose childhood scout camp experience basically spawned this lifelong obsession with what's commonly known in Australia as the Yowie.
Right.
And second, the doctor has included this bizarre, just super passionate manifesto written by a man named Ryan Dillon Brassington, and that compiles testimonies from Yowie hunters all over the continent.
So Dr. Tennillious is essentially using Brassington's wild internet lore as a lens to understand Peter's deeply personal trauma.
Exactly.
We're going to explore how a bump in the night at a childhood camp turns into this sprawling theory about interdimensional survival.
Yeah, and to really grasp how the mind processes an impossible external threat like that, we basically have to start at the exact moment the illusion of safety shattered for Peter.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're looking at the patient zero moment of Peter's trauma. It happens at a place called the Jelly Bean Pool.
Great name, by the way.
Right. It sounds so innocent. It's tucked away in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, Australia. And the scene Dr. Tennillious paints in the file is perfectly idyllic.
Like a postcard.
Exactly. It's a long-awaited scout camp. The stars are bright, the river's running over the rocks, the kids are completing normal scout challenges. It is the absolute picture of a structured, safe childhood.
And that structure is a vital piece of the psychological puzzle here.
How so?
Well, think about your own childhood experiences in those environments. A scout camp is built entirely on predictability, right? Established rules, human mastery over nature. You tie the knots in a specific way. You build the fire in the designated ring. You stay within the marked boundaries.
That's all about control.
Exactly. It's an environment designed to keep the unpredictable chaos of the wild completely at bay.
Right, but then night falls. The boys decide to play a seeking game in the dark. Peter is chosen to be the first seeker. So he makes his way up the river, he's climbing over some boulders, and he comes around a blind corner.
And this is where it all changes.
Yeah. He looks directly across the water and sees a massive dark silhouette just squatting on the opposite bank.
And as his eyes, attempt to draw in the limited moonlight, the silhouette slowly comes into focus.
He realizes it is another being. Peter watches in silence as this thing cups water from the river, brings it up to its face, and drinks slowly from its palm. And, oh man, here is the detail from the file that gave me absolute chills.
I think I know which one you're going to say.
As it slopes the water loudly from its hand, it is staring right back at Peter.
Yeah, that's the one.
They are locked in direct eye contact across the river.
It's just horrifying. And that forced confrontation is the exact moment the internal narrative battles the external reality. From a psychological standpoint, I mean, Peter's reaction here is incredible.
It really is, because he doesn't scream. He doesn't bolt into the woods. The clinical file notes that Peter simply tilted his head from side to side and started blinking rapidly.
Right.
He is desperately trying to soak in what he is seeing, and his internal monologue is actually asking, is that a fellow scout?
Which makes sense, because the human brain will do everything in its power to avoid absolute panic.
Right, it wants to protect you.
Exactly. When you're confronted with the stimulus that just defies our understanding of biology and physics, the mind experiences profound cognitive dissonance.
So think about how you react when someone jumps out from behind a door to scare you.
Oh, sure.
Your brain takes a split second to recognize the person before you either laugh or scream. Now imagine that split second stretching out indefinitely, because your brain simply cannot find a match for what it is seeing. It is like a computer totally freezing when you try to open an unsupported file type.
That's a great analogy.
The brain is frantically scrambling through its database, trying to force this terrifying monster into the safe, familiar category of fellow scout, even though the visual data clearly doesn't fit the parameters.
The brain stalls because it wants the threat to be internal.
Yeah.
It wants this to be, a trick of the light, a shadow, an overactive imagination just playing games in the dark.
Yeah, anything but reality.
Right. It attempts to overlay a known, safe reality onto an unknown horror to protect the psyche from immediate trauma. But, well, the physical evidence refuses to cooperate.
Yeah, the illusion shatters hard.
Yeah.
Because then the creature stands up. It is over 7 feet tall. Peter describes it as, quoting here, a huge bloody thing, completely black and covered in thick fur.
Terrifying.
And suddenly an overwhelming smell hits him. Peter instinctively raises his hand to hold his nose, and at that exact movement, the beast bolts.
It just takes off.
It scurries up the dry riverbed, leaps straight up onto a steep mountain wall, and vanishes into the thick bushes over the ridge.
Which brings us to the aftermath. And really, this is the anchor point of Dr. Tennillious' entire investigation into Peter's lifelong obsession.
What happens next?
Right. Peter runs back, gets the scoutmaster and the other boys, and they search the riverbank with flashlights. And they find absolutely nothing in the brush, except
for one single massive footprint pressed deep into the mud.
Yeah. And that one piece of evidence changes the entire trajectory of Peter's life.
How so, clinically speaking?
Well, if they had found nothing at all, the psychological break might have eventually healed. Peter could have convinced himself, or, been convinced by well-meaning adults that the threat was entirely internal.
Like it was just a nightmare.
Exactly. Just a scary dream while awake, a shadow cast by a weirdly shaped tree.
But the footprint proves the threat was external. It permanently validates the horror.
Yes. The sudden injection of the supernatural into a perfectly ordinary, highly structured environment creates a permanent fracture in a person's worldview. That single piece of physical proof denies Peter any psychological closure.
It's an open loop.
Right, an open loop blurring the lines between a terrifying childhood memory and this relentless clinical obsession to prove that what he saw was fundamentally real.
Wow. But there is another crucial detail Peter mentioned right before the creature ran. The smell. He noted a sudden overwhelming stench that forced him to cover his face. And that specific, visceral sensory detail is the bridge Dr. Tennillious uses to connect Peter's isolated experience at the jelly bean pool to the much larger, terrifying pattern detailed in the second part of the dossier.
Ryan Dillon Brassington's compilation of Yowie lore from across the Australian bush.
Right, so Brassington's manifesto shifts our perspective away from Peter's single memory and dives deep into the overwhelming physical and sensory mechanics of a Yowie encounter. Because according to these collected testimonies, a Yowie doesn't just scare you visually, right? It physically overwhelms your biology.
Yeah, the visual descriptions gathered by these hunters are remarkably consistent, painting a picture of an apex predator. Witnesses report beings with thick red or black hair, no discernible neck, no visible ears.
No neck at all.
Yeah, just sort of sloping right into the shoulders, a heavily sloping low brow, and a flat nose. And they are often described as having this indescribable mass that seems to, absorb the surrounding moonlight.
The document specifically says their glowing eyes seem to soak up any light. That is a profoundly unsettling image.
It really is.
But the sheer physical size isn't the weapon that paralyzes people. It goes back to what Peter experienced at the river, the stench.
Right. Brassington's text describes this not just as the bad smell of a wild animal, but as a deeply intoxicating stench. It is highly potent, carrying a death-like pungent quality that lingers in the air like a literal physical barrier.
Intoxicating is such a bizarre word to use for the smell of rotting death.
Yeah.
Usually, you associate intoxicating with a heavy perfume or alcohol.
Yeah, but in this specific biological context, intoxicating means it acts as an actual toxin.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Witnesses consistently report that the smell is so heavy it literally fills the lungs and chokes the air away. It shocks the human body, forcing the nervous system into an immediate involuntary freeze response.
Oh, wow.
The olfactory overload is so extreme that the brain just shuts down voluntary motor functions.
So the smell is a literal biological weapon. But I have to push back on the physics presented in the lore Brassington has compiled here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because there are some massive physical contradictions that Dr. Tennillious highlights. We were talking about a creature that is massive enough to, and I'm quoting the text here, push trees aside like toothpicks.
Right, the sheer physical power and mass are recurring themes in almost every encounter.
Furthermore, when it is acting defensively, it emits this engulfing noise. The testimonies describe a sound bellowing from its chest like a whale's call, but on land.
A very specific description.
Yeah, a noise so intense it rocks the human body with vibration and physically pierces the eardrums. Yet, at the exact same time, the text claims that leading up to these interactions, the forest falls completely unnaturally silent.
Right.
All ambient sound is just sucked away. You can't hear a twig snap, a leaf crunch, or a bird twitch. And the massive creature itself is said to travel in utter silence.
I see where you're going with this.
I mean, how can a massive tree-snapping beast that bellows loud enough to vibrate your bones also travel in complete utter silence and make the entire surrounding forest go dead quiet? This ceases to sound like a biological animal. It sounds like an environmental anomaly, like a walking sonic weapon.
And this is exactly where Dr. Tennillious' analysis of the internal versus external threat becomes so fascinating. If we analyze this through the testimonies Brassington gathered, the Yowie's defense mechanisms aren't purely physical in the way a bear's claws or a lion's roar might be.
What are they then?
They're targeted environmental manipulations designed to entirely overwhelm the human nervous system.
So it's a complete sensory hijack.
Exactly, a biological shutdown. The intoxicating, paralyzing smell, the vibrational, earth-shaking whale call, and the sudden, impossible vacuum of sound, these aren't just scary things happening nearby.
Right.
The silence described isn't merely the absence of noise. Witnesses describe it as a localized suppression of sound, a heavy, pressurized quiet. It induces a state of deep sensory shock.
Wow.
The victim isn't just frightened into freezing, their biological receptors are overloaded to the point of temporary paralysis.
Which perfectly explains why people freeze in place, just like Peter did at the pool. They were locked in this sudden sensory void. But even temporary paralysis and localized sonic suppression don't explain the ultimate magic trick hidden in these files.
The disappearing act.
Yes. How does a massive tree-pushing creature simply vanish without a trace in a matter of seconds, leaving only a single footprint behind?
Well, to explain that mechanism, Brassington's document abandons traditional biology entirely. The text takes a radical turn out of the physical realm.
A completely reality-breaking turn. I mean, to explain the impossible physics of the Yowie, the vanishing, the localized silence, the sheer impossibility of an 8-foot primate living in the modern bush without formal scientific detection, Brassington's text dives headfirst into interdimensional theory.
It does. The theory proposes that the Yowie does not exist purely within our third-dimensional physical plane. The document states that the creature actually resides in the 5th dimension, but it hunts, bathes, and interacts within the 4th dimension.
I have to admit, I am getting really hung up on this interdimensional leap.
It's a lot to take in.
It feels like a massive conceptual jump to go from a smelly, undocumented primate hiding in the woods to a 5th-dimensional entity. Why wouldn't Brassington just assume these are highly evasive, undiscovered apes? Why jump straight to physics-breaking interdimensional windows?
Because an undiscovered ape still has to obey the laws of physics.
A fair point.
An ape leaves a trail. An ape displaces water. An ape cannot vanish from a sheer cliff face in the blink of an eye. Brassington argues that the only way to reconcile the massive physical footprint with the creature's ability to evaporate from a closed environment is to conceptualize a broader physical reality.
Let's break that down conceptually for everyone listening. If our standard third dimension is a locked room, and the fourth dimension is time passing while you sit in that room, the fifth dimension implies a separate axis of movement entirely.
Right.
It means the creature isn't simply hiding behind a tree in the room. It is stepping completely outside the geometric rules of the room itself.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. The document describes their habitat as a place between the beyond, completely inaccessible to human senses.
Place between the beyond. That's poetic.
It is. And the theory posits the existence of colliding windows or permeable mediums between these worlds. So when a Yowie is confronted by a human, they don't just run away into the bushes. They simply step through one of these invisible windows into a safer, overlapping dimension.
Unbelievable.
Once they cross that dimensional barrier, they are gone. The sound returns, the smell dissipates, and all that is left is a footprint in the mud of our reality.
It is like these creatures possess a backstage pass to reality.
Yeah.
We, the humans, are the actors stuck on the stage, entirely bound by the physical walls, the props, and the audience. We can only move left, right, forward, and backward. But the Yowie is the stagehand. They can just pull back the curtain, step into the wings, and disappear backstage whenever they feel threatened.
And importantly, Brassington's text does not frame this interdimensional travel as magic or sorcery. It is framed as a deeply ingrained evolutionary survival mechanism.
Right, the document theorizes about their origins to back this up. It suggests they are incredibly primitive primates, perhaps surviving Neanderthals or a lost, de-evolved offshoot of the human species.
Yeah, some testimonies even casually suggest an extraterrestrial origin.
Naturally. But the core concept tying it all together is that they survived historical global cataclysms by isolating themselves incredibly deep within the wilderness. They evolved this dimensional shifting on a completely separate evolutionary path designed purely for extreme isolation and survival.
And there is a terrifying physical description in the file of how they move when they are forced to be aggressive, and it ties directly into this bizarre alien biology.
Oh, the spider thing.
Yeah, the testimonies state that when they bellow, they drop to the ground and run like a four-legged spider with a crushing intensity.
A giant, furry, interdimensional spider ape charging at you in a localized vacuum of sound.
Quite an image.
That is premium, grade A nightmare fuel, which makes the author's tone in this manifesto so incredibly surprising when you read through it.
Right. The contradiction in Brassington's own writing is one of the things Dr. Tennillious focuses on most intently. Brassington spends pages upon pages detailing these horrifying, massive monsters that paralyze you with the death stench and charge at you like a spider. Yet his personal commentary woven throughout the testimonies is incredibly gentle and protective.
He feels immense, genuine empathy for them.
He really does.
He writes that he views these creatures as a lost family. He points out that some of the testimonies describe smaller ones that look and act just like human children, simply wanting to play in the sun or splash in the river.
Just like normal kids.
Yeah, and that when the massive adults bellow and charge at a witness, it is just the parentals trying desperately to protect their young from, and I quote directly here, the dangerous human.
He completely inverts the standard monster narrative. In Brassington's worldview, humans are the apex threat. We are the unpredictable monsters wandering into the woods. The Yowie's terrifying sensory defenses, the earth-shattering whale calls, the spider running, even the physics-breaking interdimensional shifting, it is all just the ultimate form of camouflage. It is a desperate, highly evolved strategy by a vulnerable, lost species to avoid us at all costs.
It is such a wild, profound pivot from the clinical trauma in Dr. Tennillious' initial file. We started with Peter. A boy deeply traumatized, spending his entire life obsessed with the monster that broke into his safe, predictable reality. He perceives the threat as a violent intrusion.
Right.
And we end up with Brassington, who is effectively cheering on the monsters, praising their impossible survival skills, and thanking the witnesses for having the courage to share their encounters with this alluring being.
It perfectly illustrates Dr. Tennillious' core psychological inquiry. It shows how the human mind can process the exact same phenomenon, a sudden jarring encounter with the impossible, in entirely different ways.
Two totally different reactions.
Exactly. One mind internalizes it as clinical obsession and trauma, forever trying to close the loop of that footprint. The other mind synthesizes the terror into a profound, almost spiritual empathy for the unknown.
So why does any of this matter to you, listening to this deep dive right now? Maybe you don't believe in Bigfoot or Yowies. Maybe the idea of fifth-dimensional spider apes sounds like a fun science fiction story rather than reality.
Sure, and that's fair.
But the clinical realities of stories like Peter's and the deep, impassioned lore compiled by people like Brassington, they challenge our inherent arrogance as a modern species.
We really do navigate our lives assuming we have the natural world completely mapped, categorized, and conquered. We find immense comfort in our structured, predictable scout camps and our paved cities.
We trust our internal models of reality, but this deep dive asks you to critically consider the limits of your own perception. How much of the living world might actually exist just outside your peripheral vision?
Or outside your dimensional perception entirely.
Right. We rely entirely on our standard biological hardware, but what happens to you when you inevitably encounter an unsupported file type in the real world?
If we look back at the journey we took today, we began by tracking a single, highly specific childhood trauma at the Jelly Bean Pool, examining the exact moment the illusion of safety was shattered by an impossible silhouette at the river.
Yeah.
We expanded that isolated event through the horrifying, contradictory sensory details reported by hunters across the Australian bush, looking at how extreme stimuli can biologically hijack the human nervous system. And finally, we analyzed an interdimensional survival strategy of a lost species, a biological adaptation perfectly designed to evade human detection.
We went from a single footprint pressed into the river mud to colliding windows in the fifth dimension. But, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on today, something that really turns this entire paranormal mystery on its head.
Okay, let's hear it.
The sources compiled by Dr. Tennillious claim that the Yowie evolved these impossible abilities, the paralyzing toxic stench, the localized suppression of sound, the ability to physically slip out of our third-dimensional reality into the fifth, specifically to survive world cataclysms and to avoid humanity.
It is the ultimate evolutionary arms race, driven purely by evasion.
Consider what that actually implies about our place in the world. If a towering 7-foot beast, a creature that possesses the strength to push over full-grown trees and bellows loud enough to vibrate the earth, feels the desperate evolutionary need to bend the very laws of physics just to hide from humanity.
Right.
What does that say about how terrifying we are to the rest of the universe? The next time you are out in the woods at night, maybe camping or just walking in the dark, and you suddenly feel the hair stand up on your arms because you sense something watching you from behind the trees.
Oh, I hate that feeling.
Right. But maybe they aren't hunting you. Maybe they are just holding their breath waiting for you to leave.